welcome to the Trophy Grace Project. All things RASL all the time. Joined today by Ryan Hatteberg, GM of the Maple Grove Makos. Ryan, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So Ryan is an institution within RASL. I mean, we all know that. Two-time RASL GM of the Year, back-to-back, 2013, 2014. I will go on the record to say that I think that should be a three-time, including the 2017, the year of the championship. Hot take, I know, but I would support that. A couple other highlights. Trophy Grace winner in 2017, only appearance for the Makos, but they did take home the title that year. And a six-time playoff participant. Started out rough, not the greatest beginning to the franchise in the early years of RASL, but did turn it around in the late half. Been a six-time playoff participant, 2013, 2014, and then all the way 2016 to 2019, before starting a pretty significant rebuild here in 2020 and finishing a league worst, which is the second time for the Makos, finishing last in 2012, back when I think that was the Blaine Bombers, one of the first years of the Blaine Bombers after this Shoreview Spartans years. So I want to thank Ryan again for joining us. But what we're going to do today is talk about some playoff stock and where some players have gone. Whether it's up, whether it's down, whether we're buying, whether we're selling, where we think some players are headed after their performances in the playoffs. We'll also talk about some news, obviously a lot of big news, RASL related, that's happened here. We'll focus in on that. I'm sure get a few barbs, a few jabs in along the way. But first, Ryan, I just want to get a little perspective from you on what your COVID lifestyle has been like.
Well, this might not be a popular opinion, but it's been kind of a dream. As an extreme introvert homebody that doesn't want to go anywhere, I now have a very legitimate built-in excuse to, sit on the couch every night, and I love it.
Nice. That's great. I mean, it works out pretty well for you. Are you clearing out the queue?
Yeah. No, it's been a lot of Netflix, a lot of Amazon, a lot of HBO. All after I get the kids to bed. You got to get work and kids done. So,
right.
I think average bedtime has gone from something like 11 o'clock to 1 or 2 in the morning every night, and a steady stream of coffee and Mountain Dew throughout the day.
Right. That makes sense. What's the show? What are you currently in the midst of right now?
Well, I just wrapped up Silicon Valley, and I'm rewatching now Game of Thrones.
Okay. I just picked up the last season of Silicon Valley. I watched it all the way through like 3 years ago, and then the new season came out and hadn't had a chance to check it out, and then just re-upped. So I'm actually 3 episodes into that season right now.
We've watched a lot of good shows over the years, so I don't want to make anything too bold of a statement, but yeah, Silicon Valley's way up there. I wouldn't put it ahead of Arrested Development,
right?
And maybe a couple others, but it's very funny.
It is a really good show, no doubt about it. Well, I know the big thing, you've been obviously I'm sure you've been hitting fitness too, to obviously offset a lot of the sitting around. Has that been kind of the 1-2, like the TV and then the fitness?
Incorrect. I haven't exercised since 2019. And that was me starting to get going from 2015. And 2015 was the first time I tried to exercise since we finished up our playing career back in 2005. So it's been a tough go. Yeah, I never feel like I'm more than 3 weeks away from getting in real good shape. As soon as I get more than 3 weeks away from making that happen, then I'll do something about it.
Yeah, we got that. I forgot to mention off the top that we've got that game that one-on-one game from like 2007. I think we're still
going.
locked at 5-5.
Win by 2
to
Yeah.
13. Who knows? Maybe we'll get to that sometime in the next decade.
Nope.
I doubt it, but
No fouls.
no fouls. You can't call anything. It's
No.
brutal watching that. People wouldn't even expect it to be a game of basketball.
No.
Well, I think that was a good time to transition in and check out a little bit of news. Obviously, I have a couple big things to talk about here. So a couple big QB trades have obviously been made, and we want to really focus in on these from the RASL perspective. So the first one is obviously Matthew Stafford and a stack of picks being sent to the Los Angeles Rams, and Jared Goff being sent back to the Lions. And I guess I meant some picks switching hands there, but the Lions taking on Jared Goff, getting a few first-round picks. Stafford heading to the Rams. So I just wanted to find out what you think from that perspective, what that means RASL-wise. And, it's interesting, too, when we look at that because we're looking at Dubiner in St. Louis Park having big hands, both quarterbacks being on those teams, but having a couple of receivers on each team. So what's the impact for you there from a RASL perspective?
From a RASL perspective, I think that's a pretty nice little boon for Al-Man. I think, he already had Stafford and Big Ben, and the quarterback situation. Stafford's interesting because it's tough to get a real good read on where his capabilities are at, given his situation for the last few years with personnel and injuries and a coaching carousel. So tough to say, but he's going to a seemingly well-run organization with a solid coach and a good system that's going to probably allow him to flourish, which I don't see happening for Goff. I think Goff's going to a rebuild. They're eating his contract. They're going to try and turn that thing around, and he's just going to be thrown to the wolves. And I don't think he's particularly good to begin with. So I look at that and I say, Al, high floor. I think Al, at a minimum, Al got a 20 to 30% bump on Stafford production, with the potential for significantly more. And I think not talking about the receivers right now and the implications for them, I think not surprisingly, St. Louis Park finds themselves worse than they were the day before.
Yeah, and we'll talk about this. We've got an episode on the QB offseason speculation coming up, and we'll dive into these trades a little bit more there. But I think it's interesting, like you mentioned, as far as the wide receiver, for Dubiner, obviously that's, I think, an increase. I agree, an increase in value for Stafford, and for Dubiner. Also, Kupp, I think, going to be getting a bump there as somebody that actually gets the ball down the field. Goff continues, I think, to be a pretty big disappointment as far as a number one pick is concerned. He did have a QB6 year, but he finished, I think, QB12 last year, and that was his second best finish. We're 5 years in now, so I think we can make a pretty good assessment on that. And I know that now St. Louis Park does have Zeke Elliott, but knowing that the Centaurs passed up drafting Elliott at number 1 to take Goff, and now have him in that position in Detroit, where Galladay is going to be gone, Jones is going to be gone. I think a subtle thing here is I don't understand. I think players like DeAndre Swift take a big hit as well. Any momentum he had towards the tail end of last year, which I think was overstated, but I think that's taking a hit as well. So yeah, I just think St. Louis Park is in a very tough situation with this. The only thing that can maybe save them is the fact that Detroit's so bad that they'll be throwing the ball maybe 40 plus times a game. Yeah, and maybe he can stack some garbage points. But like I said, we'll dive into those a little bit more on our QB speculation episode. But touching on a highlight there, and then obviously Carson Wentz traded from the Philadelphia Eagles to the Indianapolis Colts. for a second round or third round draft pick, and a second round draft pick conditionally could become a first. So big news, I guess, for Washington County, knowing that now Wentz is an absolute starter in Indianapolis. So I think that is a boon for him. But as far as value is concerned for Wentz, what does this move do for him? Obviously, it has to be a boost just in the sense that he's a starter. But as far as situations could go that he possibly went to, where do you think this falls in that gradient?
You know, he had to move somewhere. This is a very tricky one. You know, the trader in me likes to try and find distressed assets, good buy low candidates. And it's tough to say. The more that comes out about how toxic the relationship was in Philly, the lack of communication and things, like, it's very challenging for you to function at that level to begin with. But when you have not just poor communication and, you know, butting heads, but like abjectly trying to not throw the game, but you're not trying to perform at a high level. You're pissed off. So I think a lot of people have been scratching their head and they're like, how could Wentz be in an MVP discussion a couple years ago to be in one of the worst quarterbacks in the league? And I don't think that we know that answer, but if I had to guess, I would think that the situation, now he had some injuries too, but
yeah,
the situation and the personnel and things, that's going to change. And I think Indianapolis, say what you want about Irsay, but the actual on-field play seems to have been managed pretty well.
Right.
The last several years, last decade, really. So you got some stability in the coaching staff. He goes back to his former coach. The one drawback, though, is aside from Pittman, they're not super strong at receiver, and
right.
they're going to lead with the run. So good for Jonathan Taylor Thomas, and that will take pressure off of him. So I think this has got to be a big upgrade for him. But there's also, you can't rule out the fact that maybe he just isn't the same player that he was a few years ago.
Yeah, I think, and again, we'll maybe dive into this a little bit more, but, you know, the 2018 season, people talk about that as well. You know, that's his ceiling. That's the type of play he can get back to. He was hurt, he was this, he was that, which is true. But the only thing there is you have to look at is that's also the season that Nick Foles led them to a Super Bowl. And Nick Foles has been absolute trash since then.
Yeah.
So maybe it was just that season. Maybe it was just the way the team was put together. Maybe it was just the supporting cast. Maybe it was just the right amount for each of those guys to not show their true colors. But I think that has to be part of it. I don't think you can look at that season in isolation and not say that maybe that has a little bit more to do with Wentz. I mean, he was pretty terrible this season. I mean, I think anybody that watched the games, you know, trying to make plays. And I know part of that was just who's he throwing to, who was on that team, you know, the guys from the AAF and XFL that he's throwing the ball to. And, you know, Rager couldn't get on the field and all of that. But yeah, I think it's a good situation for him. I think it's going to be improvement for Taylor, like you said. Just he maybe not be getting the receptions that he was before, but I think having a quarterback that can put the ball down the field a little bit more is going to help, and that's going to open it up for, you know, Pittman, and I think that's a bonus. It's just I don't know. I got to have another season from Wentz, and maybe this puts a chip on his shoulder that he can actually move forward with.
You know, the other thing I just comment more about RASL and Washington County is that he's square in the crosshairs of a large part of this quarterback talk in the offseason. He's got Wentz, who I already talked about. Jameis Winston is either going to be staying in New Orleans or maybe finding it, because there's a lot of teams hungry for quarterbacks. And I know we'll get into more of this later, but Alex Smith out of Washington, Ryan Fitzpatrick looks like he should be starting somewhere. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you look at that roster, and Teddy Bridgewater's making some headlines too. He has like 6 quarterbacks that could either be starting or not.
Yeah, and that speculation episode, you could just like subtitle it the Washington County off-season experience
Yeah.
because, yeah, he could be in a situation where all of a sudden he's got 6 starting quarterbacks and he can wheel and deal, or he may have one
Yeah.
and be super flexing one of his running backs. So, yeah, that could be it could be very interesting for him specifically, but yeah, we'll see. I mean, he has to be excited that Wentz is at least locked in, so he's got that taken care of. But could be interesting to see where things move from here.
Way to go, Joe.
That's right. So majorly what we want to touch on here today is talk about the playoffs and do a little bit of a stock assessment, whether or not, based on playoff performance and some of the headlines that came out from the playoff season, what that means for a few players. So we've got a few here that we want to just talk about with some key questions moving through. And we're going to start off with some players that had some quick appearances in the playoffs and maybe didn't show out too much. But the first one I wanted to get your perspective on, Ryan, is Taylor Heinicke, who had quite a performance for a quarterback that had only started one NFL game before in the opening round of the playoffs against the Bucs. Kept the Washington football team in the game. Looked pretty, usable. Looked above average. So I guess the big question for you that I have is, what GM do you think is most likely to pay for him this preseason? Who's going to blow the most? Who's going to be blowing fab on Taylor Heinicke, who, by the way, signed a 2-year contract with Washington? So maybe he's their starter.
That was surprising, and I think that was probably insurance more than anything. But
I do, yeah, I agree.
I just
somebody's going to overpay.
There's only one answer when it comes to waiver wire quarterback targets, and that's got to be our reigning champ, David Steinhaus. I expect a pretty hefty bid for his 13th rostered quarterback.
Yeah, because I mean, if anybody fits the bill, he's not handsome like a Jimmy Garoppolo, chiseled chin like Jared Stidham, but I mean, he's a good enough looking guy, and he's not very good, and he's questionable whether or not he should be a starter. And that's like the mold, like you said, for a Hopkins harpooner QB. So
the Pooners are salivating right now.
The only thing that could make them more excited for their scouting department is if he was a tight end that was 6'8", in which case you could hear him, ripping his pants from here on the East Coast. I'd be able to hear that tear from the torquing that would be happening after reading that. So I totally agree.
We love our champ.
Yeah. Hey, whatever he does works. You can't argue with it.
He's got the belt.
It happened. That's right. This is somebody we'll talk about a little bit more in the episode, but I did want to just get a brief synopsis from you. Do you think that Mitchell Trubisky is viable in 2021?
Short answer is he shouldn't be.
Yeah.
But I think you have to at least consider with maybe it wasn't the first 4 games, but there was a 4-game stretch in the 2019 season, early in the season, where he kind of went on a tear, and he was doing it with his legs and his arm, and I think he was putting up some pretty impressive stats. And the wheels kind of fell off the bus from there.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you look at what he did in the playoffs, and once again, right at the end of the season, there into the playoffs, he looked good. But Adam Gase and the dysfunction and the way that he's been handled, it's tough to think that he's got a lot of confidence. He certainly doesn't seem like he's wanted.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't think he's a candidate to get moved anywhere, or at least not that I've heard.
Yeah, I mean, it was 2018 when he had the really good season. He only played 14 games, but he did average, and I mean really good, but he did average 30. He'd average 37 points per game. So not fantastic, but that was good for, on average, that actually put him at 10th for QB average in 2018. And you're right, he was doing that both. So he's one of the more athletic quarterbacks, I think. But like you said, I don't see how he could possibly be a viable starting candidate based on what we've seen.
Yeah.
Go somewhere, be a backup, and if you get the opportunity, show up again. I think that's probably the best scenario there. And again, we'll maybe talk on that a little bit more. Hopefully, he's not going to be coming up too much in the QB speculation episode. Geneva, what does Joel care at this point? He's got Mahomes and Watson, so
Watson, career could be over.
He's going to hold out and just never play.
He said he's refusing to play.
That's true. I mean,
and they're refusing to trade him.
Yeah, be a man. He's going to be a man of principle. Maybe he'll just walk away completely.
Yeah, do a little Andrew Luck.
We can do that. Next up, and then kind of touching on Mitchell Trubisky. Obviously, his number one target was Allen Robinson. I guess the question I have for you is Allen Robinson. Like, where would you put his ceiling at, considering what he did with Mitch Trubisky and Nick Foles as his quarterbacks over the last few years?
And it's worse than that. Wasn't he on the receiving end of Chad Henne at one point? Or Blake Bortles?
That's right, Blake Bortles and Chad Henne. That's right. I forgot about his Jaguar days.
I don't know if I say this a little tongue in cheek, but I don't know if I feel as bad about another player in the NFL as I do about Allen Robinson. And you'd have to extrapolate that his ceiling is wide receiver 1 based off of the hot garbage that's been thrown to him.
Right.
You have to put it in the vicinity. If you put it in the vicinity of him, his contested catching is insane. He pulls it down. So I don't know. I hope he finds a new home. I hope it's a good home, and I hope he gets to close out the last half or less than half of his career in a favorable situation, because he's a very good receiver.
Yeah, I think Alman has to be very excited that he's reaching it. I mean, the only bad thing that could possibly happen here is if he was to somehow, if he somehow managed to get franchise tag, and then they end up with, I don't know. I mean, Mitch isn't going to be the quarterback there, but somebody close to that, that could be pretty rough. So, similar to that, then I guess would be JuJu Smith-Schuster. He had a phenomenal game against the Browns. Phenomenal in terms of obviously number of catches. I mean, they were Steelers had so many
4-yard
down so much, and obviously JuJu kind of par of the course for his last 2 seasons. Had about 30 targets for 150 yards. But do you think somebody like JuJu outside of Pittsburgh has value? Being in Pittsburgh, where they throw the ball 40 times, Ben can't throw the ball more than 5 yards downfield. That plays right into JuJu's wheelhouse. Do you think he has as much value? Like, what do you think? Well, we can talk. We'll have a free agency episode we talk about a little bit later, but what's the value for him? Somebody that you used to have on your team, and I think you might have seen this coming, and that might have been part of why he's no longer in Maple Grove.
It was tough. He was a my guy. I drafted him. I did my YouTube research, the old eyeball test, and he had it.
And you said he got it.
He got it. Look at the tape. He got it. So I'm watching that and I'm thinking, okay, this guy's a stud. He was put into a good situation. I'm probably providing a little too much background and context here, but we've got our rookie red shirts. So I redshirt him.
Right.
So I missed out on the now second best, maybe not second best, but one of the best rookie receiving seasons of all time. And I don't know if he got hurt right away in year 2 or if it was just declined production, but he was my guy, and I never really got to enjoy what I thought I was going to with him. Yeah. And I think for exactly what you pointed out, you look back at some of that year one production, and it was all yak. It was all busting big plays. It was maybe Antonio Brown drawing some coverage, and a younger Ben with a more lively arm throwing to him.
Right.
I wanted to build my franchise around him, so I know a lot of people looked at the Makos and thought it was really the only investable asset for a while there. But I'm now hearing reports that he's saying he wants to stay in Pittsburgh. I don't know if that's a negotiating tactic.
I don't know. He's kind of a strange bird. So
he does
really
march
know.
to the beat of his own drum. I mean, that part is for sure. So
yeah,
I wouldn't put it past him. But the quarterback uncertainty and the lack of production and the dilution.
Mm-hmm.
They've got some other really good receivers there with a quarterback that says he's coming back and just can't get it done. So I always assumed he was going to be a big free agent target that would go to a nice place. And for a while there, it seemed like the Jets. And that's never a good thing. So I've got to sell on him, which hurts me. And I might be emotionally involved there, like a little jilted on tilt. So
Still
I don't know,
for
but
him.
I wish him well, but I don't want any part of that.
Yeah, in that 2017 season, he averaged 23.9 points per game, finished as a wide receiver 17. That's the 7th best rookie average in RASL history. Just behind your boy Eddie Royal in 2008 at 24.3. Yeah. And then Michael Thomas at wide receiver 3. So three Makos in the top 7 for all-time rookie averages.
YouTube.
There you go. So you got to believe in the got it, don't got it for wide receivers.
Yeah, it's a lifestyle.
That's right. So this one's picked up a lot of steam. Actually, this player picked up a lot of steam as far as headlines are concerned. And again, we'll talk about maybe the destination and how much we're believing in the rumors about him wanting out more in the QB speculation episode. But for this playoff stock, what I want to focus on for Russell Wilson is what happened exactly in the tail end of the season, and especially in that playoff game. What happened there, just in your eyes from what you saw? Because obviously in the Ruskin Cook there in the first half, he's quarterback 1. He's looking like he's going to be the MVP. He was QB1 for RASL for I think the first like 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And then it kind of fell off. So what do you think? Do you think that's his play? Do you think that's offensive approach? Some combination of the two? What do you think really led to that kind of him falling off the cliff? And when I say fall off the cliff, I mean he still finished as a top 5 quarterback, but
for the season, but that was driven by a really strong, like you said, first half.
Right.
He was, and I think even Dan sat him. Now that was partially because he had 2 other.
Yeah, correct. But
he wasn't
in the championship. Wasn't playing Russell Wilson. He was playing Josh Allen and Justin Herbert, and none of us would have disagreed, I think.
No. So he wasn't, in our league with our setup, he wasn't an automatic start, which is just crazy to think after the October. Was it through October? Is that kind of when it's switched?
Yeah, I mean he had a 24.4 point game in week 10. So the first 9 weeks, through the first 9 weeks with his bye, he was averaging 49.8 points per game. And then he failed to score over 39 the rest of the season from week 10 on. Yeah. So he was averaging 40, but basically 50, and then failed to score over 38.2 the rest of the season. He did finish as QB7. I said QB5, but it was actually QB7.
So he's a strange bird. I don't know that I fully understand how he operates, but. So, and I think we'll probably do a deep dive on that part of it later.
Yeah, absolutely.
but I guess you'd probably have to lean on coaching. A failure to make adjustments in the second half of the season. And I think you probably don't want to overlook Chris Carson, because he had been a good weapon out of the backfield. He had, I think, quite a few receptions. So he was running the ball a lot. They were setting up the play action. They caught a few people off guard, and then I think they just failed to adjust. So when Carson went down and they had to lean on a rotation of lesser running backs, and didn't lead with the run to set up everything and didn't adjust. And there's probably some strength of schedule there too, running into some tougher teams in the second half and not making adjustments. So that would be my guess.
Yeah, I think, there's been so much talk over the years about why don't they throw the ball? And they threw it. And, they're winning all those games early on. So I think if you look at win losses and how it ties to how much Wilson's throwing the ball, it makes sense. I think that also is a further point as far as DK Metcalf is concerned. What that effect is on him, because, and we've talked about this before, in the first half of the season, I think we saw kind of what that ceiling was for DK Metcalf, to the point where I don't think it would have been, it might have been very much the majority opinion that DK Metcalf was the wide receiver one for Dynasty. And then in the back half, he kind of was a boom or bust guy again on whether or not he could get a bonus touchdown. And, in our league with a bonus touchdown, you're still very, very relevant, but he was far and away the wide receiver one through those first 8 weeks, when Wilson was going at it. So, that just kind of brings him down a little bit if that's the approach. And it seems like, based on what Carroll's done and the changes they've made, that they're certainly looking to be a little more old school in their approach. So I don't know, maybe that'll ultimately end up pushing Russ out, but we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the QB speculation episode for sure. So you made a big move for a player at the end of the season. People, it's a your guy kind of player. Term. Yeah, it's a your guy kind of move, where a dollar gets it and you're like, well, here's $2.75, and that player is Marquise Brown. Hollywood, yep, I like to call him. That's why you pay that extra, you get that Hollywood shine for him. Marketing. So yep. And I think you had to be happy as someone that definitely gave a lot up to get him. Now, a lot is relative. Just on its face, it's a lot. I know in your mind you gave away some rotten fruit, that looks fine on the outside, but it's rotten at the core. And I don't necessarily disagree with you after you explained it, but the tail end of the season, and especially in the playoffs, and that the 2 games that the Ravens played, Marquise's target share was very, very high. So is that something you think, as we move into 2021, obviously you must think that that's going to be a long-term situation based on making the move for Marquise. So is that obviously something you were excited about looking at those 2 games, right? Very excited.
And I was concerned when I made that trade. He was getting goose egged. He was playing, 50, 60 snaps or whatever it was, and he got 0. Mm-hmm. So it was an opportunity to do what I like to do with distressed assets and then overpay for them. So you're 100% correct on that, but it was very good to see that. Is that part of the reason maybe why like the long term, just in like the financial game, and maybe it was just not, you didn't apply the principles that made you successful in the financial sector towards your asset management when it comes to RASL? Oh boy, that's a loaded question. We don't have. We don't. I'll have to ruminate on that and get back to you. Yeah. We'll circle back. We can circle back on that one. But no, for Hollywood. It's all about the Asian market. We know that. Please, everybody knows that. Low interest rate environment, assets are inflating.
Yeah, you gotta hammer it.
Yep. Foot on the gas pedal.
That's right. I mean, distressed, buy, sell.
Yeah. Momentum
Strong.
right now.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Yeah. The yen. I don't even have a short list of like buzzwords that I can use to even extend that conversation beyond the Asian market.
Yeah. Well, I think all you need to know right now is crypto. Crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum, blockchain, things of this nature.
You could have a whole podcast where someone explains cryptocurrency to me, and I just kind of don't know if I'll ever wrap my head around it. And I'm not a Luddite, by any means, but just the idea of cryptocurrency still, no one's really explained it to me very well. So that's probably part of it, but it does make me feel like a really old man that I don't completely understand it.
Yeah.
And I don't like that. It's not a good feeling.
No. Well, I think there's a lot of things in play right now, a lot of things in motion, a lot of strands in the old duder's head right now.
Yeah.
Where that, we don't know what's going to happen. And I think even the people that are deep in it don't know what's going on either. So I wouldn't feel too bad about that take.
Thanks.
But coming back to Hollywood Brown, getting back
the cryptocurrency of wide receivers.
The Bitcoin and it ties into the next one too, Lamar Jackson.
Yeah.
I don't say, I think the knock on him on Lamar was that he can't pass, and certainly there was evidence that corroborated that this year.
Right.
But one of the things that you like about it is the scheme, the personnel, and the way they tailored the game to him. And I think it changed the way people look at running quarterbacks. And I think there was an adjustment this year, but I am 100% all on board with Baltimore and Lamar Jackson. And I think Mark Andrews, for any more inexperienced younger quarterback, it tends to be a safety blanket. And there's not a huge pie of passes to go around in Baltimore to begin with.
Yeah.
So it's easy to get shut out. But I don't think that Lamar is going to be a 60 to 80% runner. I think he's going to develop. They're going to work on their scheme. And I think eventually the wide receiver one, especially with a running quarterback, the wide receiver one that can get behind the DBs, which is exactly what he does. He's got the separation and he's got the speed.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of lumpiness right now to the production, and I think I got in low. But I think he has a good chemistry and relationship with Lamar. So I think Hollywood is going to be the wide receiver one there. And I only see the pie growing. What did he at Lamar average? Maybe like 150 yards, or it was less than 200 yards a game for sure.
Yeah, it was closer to 180 passing.
And I think within the next 2-3 years, that average is going to be north of 200 considerably, I would think. And I think he's going to be the largest recipient. They have some other good receivers, though, some rookies that I know you got. One that you're Duvernay.
Duvernay, like. who I feel like is a less explosive version of Marquise Brown, a little bit better route runner, but not nearly as physically talented. And I guess the main worry for me, and I don't know, Brown's higher up in the pecking order, is just with this draft being a wide receiver heavy draft and where the Ravens are picking, is that going to be, you mentioned how small that pie is, right? It's a small pie that's cut up a couple of ways. If they're going to go out there and think that the way to maybe make that passing game work a little bit better is to have another receiver, that could make things interesting. I'm sure they're going to add somebody either in the draft or free agency, just because playing Willie Snead and Miles Boykin.
So don't sleep on Proshi.
That's true.
He didn't get any burn this year, or at least he didn't get any stats. I think he saw a few snaps here and there, but the PR machine runs and they always say the right things. But they were hyped on him. And he was another one where you watch the YouTube highlights, and he is an aggressive receiver.
He was very
attacks
good
the
at
ball.
SMU. Yeah, he was very good at
Attacks the
SMU.
ball.
I had him on my board in the top 50.
Yeah,
I liked him a lot.
So we'll see, but again, I think the story starts and stops in Baltimore receivers with the volume.
Yeah, and with
or
that
lack
volume,
thereof.
right? But with that volume was similar to 2018 when Lamar Jackson had the highest scoring RASL season of any quarterback ever. So I guess the question I have for you is that we got that phenomenal season in 2018 and a season where, depending on who you talk to, you'd think Lamar like completely fell off the face of the earth with how he played this year. And in reality, I mean, he ended up finishing QB 11, which is certainly disappointing for him after the season he had last year. But what do you think he's closer to in 2021? Do you think he's closer to the 2020 season he had or to 2019?
I think it'll be 19. I think he'll be a top 5. I think we'll look back and say that the little slump that he showed in the beginning of the 2020 season, the first half, I think that'll be an aberration, and you'll look at it and he'll be a perennial top 5 quarterback.
Yeah. I think this is just fell outside of that. I don't buy into the narrative that this is somehow the NFL figured out, because he's a run first quarterback and he's not a good passer. And, the NFL always figures that out, and you can't hide from not being a good passer. I just think that's completely short-sighted. And yeah, I think 2018, that's probably the best he's ever going to play, because it was literally one of the most efficient and best seasons the quarterbacks ever had in totality in terms of what they did for an offense. I know, passing numbers, but his passing touchdown percentage was one of the highest it's ever been. So I think he's closer to that. And I think anybody that's sleeping on that is making a huge mistake. Definitely. It seems like we've been really focusing in on a lot of Maple Grove Makos here, and that just happens to be.
I noticed that.
Yeah. Really, these seem to be the stories from the playoffs. But Cam Akers, had I don't know, I guess we could call it a surprise second game. I don't think a lot of people with Jared Goff and his busted hand playing against the Seahawks thought that they were going to get a second game, but the reason they did get that second game had a lot to do with how Cam Akers played. So going into 2021 with the playoff performance that he had, I mean, I know it's a bit of a rhetorical question because obviously you've got to be super high on him, but how high are you? Like, where do you think his ceiling is right now with what you saw in the playoffs? Because that tail end of the season was great, but what he did in the playoffs, I think, really showed you starting to get the volume and really involved in the game in all facets.
Yeah, no, it's bittersweet. It's been kind of a roller coaster because he showed some of the performance that I was kind of hoping I'd get 16 games of to start the season.
Yeah.
I certainly thought he had that capability, and a lot was made of how bad his offensive line was at FSU and what he would do in a run first offense with an intelligent scheming coach. So, to hear the I didn't watch any of the Hard Knocks, so I didn't get a lot of the commentary going there. I saw a few quotes and sound bites there that maybe the game was big for him. He was just happy to be there type of attitude. And I don't know if that factored in or not. And Darrell Henderson's a good running back. I don't mean to take away and say that he's not good, but I think Cam has the potential to be elite. And so to not get that, and there were plenty of healthy, not even health. He wasn't scratched from the game, but he would get like fewer than 10 carries or fewer than 10 snaps.
Right.
He didn't get the third down work. So it was, and I think he can catch, but they were putting in Malcolm Brown, and it was just it was very discouraging at times, especially, and I know we'll probably get into this at some point, probably not today, but the amount of what do you call it, draft capital
Mhm.
or the value I put on him based on that's who I got from the Blockbuster trade. So
Yeah, he's
I really need.
got a heavy weight on those shoulders.
He did, and I thought it would be big, and it looked like an absolute flop. So there was some serious moments of dread there. And then when he finally got, I think it was a 29 carry game, for 160 some yards, it was like, okay. So it, like I said, roller coaster, feeling really, really bad about it to finally, some relief, some euphoria. And now I'm getting concerned because now you're hearing all the things from McVay, like, no, he's the 3 down back and he's our workhorse and we're going to get all of it. And I'm hoping that the fact that he said those things about Darrell Henderson and that didn't play out, maybe not to that degree,
right?
But they used a 2nd round pick on him, right?
Yeah,
Darrell the year before.
Yep.
So I'm hoping that this was his bigger plan from the beginning, and it was more of an approach on how to develop him. But I'm really high right now to the point where I'm actually concerned that I'm too euphoric. Or maybe I need to take some downers or something because Cam Akers for life.
Yeah. Well,
and Stafford,
it's only going to help. Yeah, I think being able to stretch the field a little bit more will help because I do think Akers, even with how well he was playing in the tail end in the playoffs there. I mean, that was a lot of stacked boxes, especially Seattle. I mean, Seattle was playing man defense on the outside and had 8 guys sitting there, and Akers was still slashing them up. So I think, and like you said, I mean, I think that had to be a really rough first half of the season when you're watching Henry just continue to cyborg everybody, and then Watson still playing great. Then Bob gets fired and you're like, then he really gets unleashed. Moss struggling a little bit out of the gate, and then Akers isn't really showing up. You're playing the long game there, but it had to feel good to see the end of the season here in the playoffs with what he showed, because you can feel a little bit better about that deal as you move forward. Well, moving into teams in the conference championships, I think a big thing, and you mentioned this, and this is one thing that Whitaker certainly rode to the championship, was that elite jump that Josh Allen made. And I guess a big question with what we saw in that, the Bills almost completely ignored the running game. The running game was basically Josh Allen on scrambles or Josh Allen on called run plays. I think they were averaging something less than 18 carries a game for their running backs combined. Do you think that dual threat means that we're just looking at this as a continuous top 3 quarterback moving forward, or do you think that this is going to get scaled back to try and maintain his health and maintain the longevity because of how much of a jump he made in terms of accuracy and as a passer?
I think they've got to rein it in a little bit. The quarterback position has evolved in such a way where it really does favor keeping them healthy and protecting them. And maybe that's at least partially why there's been a bigger push for mobile quarterbacks, is the rules favor them so much, and you can get them out of the pocket. And if they've got the athletic ability, there's a little bit less fear, from the coaching staff or from the player that, hey, I know they can't take me out.
Right.
Now, doesn't always work out that way. Dak Prescott, I think I don't know if his was non-contact or if he got rolled up while he was getting tackled, but there's so much money invested in him. And they lost their offensive coordinator, right? He got a head coaching gig.
Yep.
So I think there'll be a little bit of a shift, and they've.
Oh wait, the Bills? No, Dable's still there.
Oh, did okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe he still will, but I see that evolving. It may not happen next year, but in the next couple years, you're going to have to get him, especially since he did that unthinkable and improved his accuracy to the degree that he did.
Right.
You're going to want to keep him in the pocket. And if he's going to do that, you need an extension, take some pressure off of him. And you would think that will turn into a few more running back opportunities. The problem is neither one differentiated themselves. So they kind of like the Hollywood Brown thing, the volume wasn't there.
Right.
There was no rhythm. They shared touches. It didn't seem to be really any rhyme or reason to it. So they underwhelm for a couple reasons there. And there's speculation of some pretty big name running backs that the Bills could be going after. And at least two of them, if they're in a position to draft them, are going to make those two irrelevant.
Yeah, either one of those two top guys ends up there. Yeah, they're irrelevant.
They'll back up and then they'll be on different teams because those are feature backs that are going to be landing on a good team.
Yeah, and that situation for those guys in Buffalo, ending up on that team with a quarterback that can, throw. They've got great receivers, a good line. That could be that could really make some tough choices at the top part of the draft, rookie draft for some RASL owners, because plugging those guys into Buffalo could be huge. And you mentioned the running backs and the Bills, and I think one thing is looking at kind of what the Chiefs have done, where you're almost completely forgetting, especially towards the tail end of the year, the Chiefs basically just kind of gave up running the ball. They're so efficient at passing. Why wouldn't they keep doing it? You saw the Bills start to do that a little bit with the pass run split. But like you said, I think maybe that was more of a personnel decision than it was maybe a scheme, just going with what works. And I think a big thing that comes from that then is when you're looking at 2021, if you think Stefon Diggs and is a realistic wide receiver one, option, is that someone that you see? Is he in the combo for finishing as wide receiver one moving forward?
I think he's got the potential, but I kind of think everything aligned this year for him.
Right.
You had the honeymoon phase, and with Diggs, like a lot of receivers, it seems like in between the ears plays a big role. And he was excited about his new opportunity. He had a big arm. And the way the running backs played out, it just, John Brown was injured for most of the year. Yeah. So I think it really turned out to be a perfect storm for Diggs. I look at either John Brown coming back or the Beasles and even Gabriel Davis. I think there's some good options at the receiver position there. And I think that there's a good chance that that the volume is less next year than it was this year, in which case you'd have to say that it's probably, there's going to be some regression for Diggs.
Well, and you said like everything kind of fallen into place for him, and that led to him being wide receiver 3 in terms of overall average for the season. And that's taking into account the fact that he scored 47, 45, and 67 points in the 3 playoff games for the RASL regular season. So obviously he continued that in the playoffs. He was, phenomenal in most of the playoff games, but he did finish the regular season on average at wide receiver 8, and for the total RASL season, including playoffs and Pro Bowl, was wide receiver 3. So he said that's kind of maybe top end you'd expect. I agree. I don't think he's in the discussion for wide receiver 1 overall, but certainly going to be a top 10 option, I think, moving forward. The questions about how it was going to work with Allen, I think, have been more than answered. So I think that's a safe bet to make. the last couple of players we want to talk about, Super Bowl players. Obviously, I don't know if anyone probably upped their stock more in terms of for 2021 and during the playoffs, and probably Leonard Fournette. So playoff Lenny, are you buying playoff Lenny? Are you buying that this is what he brings or what he's going to bring, or is this just, is it just back against the wall and what are you going to do?
Oh my God. This is one of those, you put yourself out on a limb.
And hey, shocker, it's more Washington County off-season magic.
Yeah. So I know people have been burned and he has looked horribly inefficient at times. I think I'm buying playoff Lenny.
I am too.
Honestly, I think it's tough to get a good read on a Jacksonville player given the last 10 years. There's been a lot of things working against them there.
Right.
So it's tough to really say for sure that he was never good.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like some of the other players, there's some notable injuries early.
Right.
And that, along with the team, the personnel, and everything, could have led to inefficiency. And even at times early with the Bucks, he didn't look great. Right. But whatever they needed to do to get him motivated and get him playing his best, they did it. Mm-hmm. And you look back and it feels like people have been dealing with Leonard Fournette, it feels like, for quite a while. And he's not obviously young by running back standards, but he's also not old.
No. I mean, this is only his fourth season.
It's his fourth season. It feels like it's his sixth or eighth season.
Right.
So he probably has a lot of miles left on those legs. And now he's pointed in the right direction.
Right.
Do you think the Bucks keep him?
I think they do. I mean, I think they try to. I think he fits really well for them. I didn't understand this whole idea that he was washed. He finished as running back 8 last year in RASL. He was running back 8 in 2019. Finishes the 22nd highest scoring player. He only, he averaged 31.5 points per game, running back 8. Everyone wants to talk about James Robinson, and I think that was great. I mean, the only difference here is obviously James Robinson was on a rookie minimum contract, but Fournette stats, he had, about 100 more rushing yards, 35 or 37 more catches, and almost 200 more yards receiving in 2019 than Robinson had. So he had 52 more touches. He had 260 more yards. And, people say, well, he wasn't very efficient. Well, Robinson wasn't particularly efficient either. He averaged 4.9 yards per touch, which was 30th amongst running backs. And Fournette the year before finished, I think, 23rd. So I don't think, I don't really get it. He had a great season, 2017 as a rookie. He was a top 12 running back as a rookie. And then got hurt in 2018. And he's not a particularly efficient guy, but if you're going to get him 20-some carries, he can do a lot. And if you give him a smaller amount, he can still bust some. He's got some pretty good speed. He's strong. He can catch the ball. He proved that, last year with the Jags. So I am buying it. I mean, I think this is more what I expected from him. And I thought this was probably what was going to happen when he went to Tampa Bay, because this is kind of what he had showed in Jacksonville. And I never really understood why everyone was, outside of it fitting a narrative, was tossing him aside so quickly.
Yeah, and the catching the ball part, I think, I don't know this for sure. It could just be my lack of awareness, but I would guess that most people, if you mention Leonard Fournette in the fantasy community, not analysts or anything like that, but they probably would think of Fournette as a between the tackles, early down back.
Right.
give him maybe even 30 rushes, but you're not going to really dump anything off to him.
Right.
And what's interesting is in Tampa, when Ronald Jones number 2 was gone early and in the middle part of the season, Leonard Fournette's role was the third down back.
Right.
So they put him in there to catch the ball and to pass protect, which to me is, so now you're telling me that you've got this premier potential who has underperformed from an efficiency standpoint. You just rattled the numbers, so it's not like he underperformed. He had good finishes.
Yeah.
But you're telling me that this guy really is a 3-down back. So I think it's a question, what happens if he stays in Tampa? They didn't really Vaughn let the rookie do anything.
Right.
And so you wonder if they want to see what he's got, and Ronald Jones too.
Yeah, the only thing I can think is that based on where they drafted Vaughn, that maybe they just say, okay, well, we're going to go with the draft capital we have here. We've got Jones. We liked what Jones did, and they let Fournette walk because he could get so much more someplace else. I just think he fits really well with what Tampa's doing. But yeah, I'm going to buy it. I'm going to buy the playoff run and say that that's going to continue on.
We're both buying.
That's right. Typical buying on playoff money. Briefly for another situation here, I guess, talking Tampa wide receivers. What did you see from the Super Bowl run there? From the Tampa wide receivers, what do you think? How do you think that shakes out heading in the offseason here? Obviously, we'll talk about this more for these two when we get in, or for Chris Godwin when we get into the free agency discussion. But what did you see there in terms of likelihood that you think Godwin's going to be back based on the way the playoffs shaked out?
Based on the way the playoffs shook out, I have a hard time believing he'd go back.
Yeah.
If he wants to get paid and he's got the championship now. So depends on how you want to, the commentary from the players and everybody in their euphoria after their championship was, we're running it back. We're bringing everybody back. But I think that's going to die down after a little bit and the business will take over.
Right.
And if you look at the performance, he was an afterthought. And that is a guy that should not be an afterthought.
Right.
So
I think that's a product of how they're going to play and how Brady is. Yeah. I mean, he's never been someone to force somebody, feed him. The closest was Moss, and even in the Moss season when he set those records, it wasn't on a ton of catches. It just was a high volume of touchdowns.
Well, like Welker and Edelman, I feel like the slots, he'll on quick slants, he was peppering pretty good, and the skinny posts up the field. But at this point in his career, and it seems like for sure Brady's coming back for maybe even a couple more years.
Yeah.
He's already defied logic, so you can't just completely write him off, but you're not expecting big gains or increases to his volume, to his efficiency, to the strength of his ability to throw downfield. So there's no business reason, and other than to play a team game and to win a championship, that Godwin should want to go back there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I just think I don't think it's a better situation for him to stay in Tampa. I think it's a better situation to leave. I do agree. I think like a lot of that's, we're going to run back. We're excited to win a championship, and then the money conversation starts happening after the euphoria wears off. And I already got a title. I don't want to take that big of a discount. What they're willing to pay for people. With Evans there, what are they going to do? I think the Bucs should want to do it. I just don't think for Godwin. I think it's the best. I don't think for Geneva, in terms of where they're at, I don't think Joel's going to want Godwin to stay in Tampa and minimize his value. because one thing for Geneva is Joel really needs wide receivers to step up. He's traded away some of his depth there. Some of those big time guys have kind of fallen back a little bit, and especially this year with Godwin, it was pretty tough. That kind of being your wide receiver, two after Metcalf kind of cooled off. It was tough to work through that. So I think he definitely wants to see him go someplace else. And I think Godwin's the type of player where almost anywhere he goes, he'll be successful because he can do so many different things. He's not just a slot guy. He's not just a speed guy. He really can do everything. And ultimately, that's going to help Evans as well, who's becoming, I think, pretty touchdown dependent. Not exactly what you want to see in a wide receiver, but
you got to wonder if it's certainly played out in such a way that it looks like scheme and positioning for later in the season. Because I think there were a couple times where Evans had like 2 catches for 2 touchdowns for 2 yards. It was like a Jerome Bettis line from your wide receiver one.
And that was he did have a game, 2 catches for 2 yards, 2 touchdowns. And I think he had 4 1-yard touchdowns on the season.
So he's he's getting older. I think he's chronically banged up also. And there's just,
you just don't see a lot. And I didn't see it in the playoffs either. And I know he was a little bit banged up, obviously. He had the calf injury, I think it was that in week 17. But it's not what you'd see a few years ago. And part of that maybe is the difference between Jameis and Brady. But I didn't see a lot in the playoffs, especially where you'd watch. And, Evans did get, I think, 4 or 5, especially in the Packer game, which don't get me started on that. But as far as the DPIs that he drew a lot of DPIs, but they were never, but those are things where a couple of years ago, he's not drawing DPIs because he's 2 yards or 3 yards past the DB. And now that's not happening. And I think, I do think that that's kind of showing the age. He's younger than I expected him to be. But I think there's a lot of wear and tear there with a lot of nicks and injuries and hamstrings and things like that.
The big question. So Tampa's not going to want to reboot.
No.
Right. So they've got Tyler Johnson. They got
you
Scotty.
can't do that with Brady. Yeah.
No, you can't do it with him. So he's going to be there for at least another year. The problem is Godwin's going to need a multi-year contract. And you've got some of these other, so like you need people to buy in for 1 year, but they can't really run the organization like that. And the players aren't going to, it's going to require some abnormal buy-in. That would be for the team. And I think I don't think they'll be able to pull that off, but if they are, I think it's a hit for everybody's fantasy value.
Yeah. And right. When you think about that, if you're running on 1 year kind of situation, even 2 year, who are you looking at? You're looking at older guys who don't have that many years. So they're thinking, what does it matter signing a 2-year contract or a 1-year contract and going for a title? Or it's, undrafted free agents trying to pull people through the draft, things like that. And it's a little bit tougher, I think, in the NFL too, especially with the non-guaranteed, to be signing a 2-year deal and expose yourself to that, not getting like a lot of the money up front for cap hit reasons, which is I think what Tampa would be trying to do. So it makes it a little bit difficult. Obviously winning the title last year helps them sell that for this season, but for players like Godwin who are right in the middle of their prime and want to cash in on those big contracts, you're not going to get discounts there.
No.
Well, the last player I want to talk about, or we can maybe mention a couple others on the Chiefs, but I think the one that really stands out is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And I do have to preface almost everything related to Clyde Edwards-Helaire by talking about my really it's unsavory how much I dislike
Don't
him.
hold back. Don't hold back.
I have to talk about my disdain for him, and it's not even for him, it's for the idea of him as a fantasy player. And that's hard for me to be objective about. And a lot of that has to do with where he was faced up against Jonathan Taylor. and how we all had to hear how all of a sudden he went from being a guy who couldn't beat out Nick Brissett, who didn't even make it in the AAF 2 years ago at LSU, and Nick not making it last year in the AAF, to all of a sudden becoming the clear number one running back prospect, one of the greatest prospects ever. Brian Westbrook, Andy Reid, he just is a running back guru, all this nonsense. And and then watching Clyde Edwards-Helaire shove at my face in week 1 and watch Jonathan Taylor trip all over himself, and not even trip over himself, just get kneecapped by Frank Reich. But anyway, for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, specifically at the playoffs, I know he was hurt, but do you think this is a microcosm of his season overall? In that, is he a key cog in this offense, or is this a situation where they tried to make fetch happen and it just couldn't do it?
Stop trying to make fetch happen.
I mean, seriously, right? You tried. You gave him the ball inside the 5-yard line every possible time, and the dude couldn't get across the goal line. So
he's allergic to tutties.
Yeah. So I mean, do you think the playoffs and his lack of use and not getting a lot of touches, all of a sudden Darrell Williams overtaking him, do you think that's a microcosm of the season overall and what we can expect for 2021? Or do you think, nope, this is just they're being cautious, he was hurt, it's all these different type of things? What do you see from CAH in 2021?
I'm selling hard. I always get a little bit leery of a few things in the draft season, and one of them is abnormal dislocations based off of landing spot. Right. I'm a big believer in opportunity. These guys are all good, so the opportunity that they find themselves in does play a big factor. So I understand the logic behind why people got more excited about him, but it's like a really fast 40 time that launches a player up 3 rounds higher than he would have otherwise gone, where It's like, yeah, but did you watch him play?
Yeah.
And
the Darius Hayward Bay, if you will.
Exactly. And you had a little bit better context on the background and the competition for the running back position at LSU. But you could easily point out and say that was a prolific offense that was entirely driven by Burrow,
right?
Which takes a ton of pressure off of him and allowed him to be successful. But there's draft capital because he got picked relatively high, and it was a good landing spot. And I think they wanted to make it work. But you do whatever you have to win in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And they decided they ghosted him. He just wasn't there. Right. And I think there's people you'll play through injuries.
Yeah.
So maybe I don't know the inside on the injuries. Maybe that was worse than people were letting on. But I look at it, and they brought in another running back, free agent, in the middle of the year with Le'Veon Bell. And they just never trusted him. And when they did, he, aside from a few open field plays that he made here and there, he's not really super effective between the tackles. Right. He's not a short yardage guy, and it's a pass first offense. So I think they desperately need somebody to take some pressure off and have the ability to change it up and adapt and run the ball. And the way that turned out, I mean, I think I saw a stat recently that Mahomes ran for I don't know what it was, 500 yards in the game to make his passes in the Super Bowl. It was 530 yards or something like that he scrambled to try and get his passes off, which was more rushing yards than some teams had for the season.
Right.
And the answer was to run the ball up the middle and take the pressure off, and they couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So now I went from not high on him and thinking that he was drafted way above where he should have been to wondering if he's even going to be a viable player in the coming years. And I think there's a strong chance he's not.
Yeah, and I mean, I get it, draft capital wise, he's the only first round running back that was taken. I get it. Typically any read running backs do well. I don't, it's hard for me to think that a guy that, was maybe in the top 5 running backs before draft season really kicked off, all of a sudden now is the clear number 1 and one of the best, fantasy football prospects to like come out of college. And I just think there's maybe almost been a turn so much where the narrative now is so negative against what Edwards-Helaire did. And obviously I was more than happy to be a part of that. He did finish the regular season as running back 13. That was before his injuries really hit. Running back 18 overall, so not terrible, but I mean, considering where he was being looked at as far as the consensus, that's not that's not great. And I think the thing for me, and like you mentioned, that really sticks out more is playoffs wise, like what that showed. And yeah, he was hurt, and I think that has a lot to do with it, but he was usurped by a lot of running backs, and saw Akers playing big time in the playoffs and Gibson getting a lot of run in the playoffs. Edwards-Helaire did manage to put up the 25th best rookie season in RASL history as far as an average is concerned. 25.8 is not bad. That was buoyed by a couple of really big games, but so I do think he should get some credit for that. I just see it to be how successful the Chiefs were passing the ball that they might really just decide, yeah, this is something we do, sprinkle it in, where a team used to be where you'd sprinkle in passing. You think about like the Titans from a few years ago where they'd throw the ball 19 times a game just to try and keep the defense off kilter, and it's like maybe they run the ball 10, 11, 12 times and see what happens there. So yeah, I'm feeling better about my disdain there, but I still have to keep it in check. It's not necessarily fair to CEH, but I do think that this was maybe a little bit more of a sign of what's to come. It wasn't so much about injury as it was just where he fits and everything, and how they feel that they're the best team. So, any other final takeaways from playoffs in terms of stock that you'd like to talk about, or anyone we missed?
Well, no, but my final thought on Clyde Edwards-Helaire is I'm just thankful that the GM that drafted him did take him.
Oh yeah.
Because honestly, I think most people thought, or should have thought, that Jonathan Taylor Thomas was the class of the draft, and that proved to be correct.
Right.
But I think Cam Akers is going to vie for that spot, which is why I wanted to get him.
Right.
And that was my scouting report on him. And if a certain GM had a little bit more savvy to him, did a little more research, I very easily could have ended up with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and that would have been hellacious.
Yeah, you are a lucky man. It's a good thing that that GM probably didn't know who any of the prospects were more than a couple days before the draft. So the draft capital probably meant a little bit more. But hey, he usually works pretty well on the running back picks. So, but yeah, you got to be happy. Especially with the playoffs, what could have been there is that's Clyde Edwards-Helaire pick would be pretty tough going in the off season right now if that was the fulcrum for the Watson and Henry trade for sure. So, well, Ryan, this has been great. I think we covered a lot of good ground, dove into a few things like we talked about. We'll be coming back again with some future episodes talking about the QB speculation in the off season. We'll be talking about RASL awards, recapping those, covering a lot of things throughout. I mean, I don't know, not too bad. I think we can obviously some points of improvement, much like my regular season RASL management. Plenty of spots to work on, but thanks again for being a part of it, and I look forward to the next time that we get a chance to sit down and chat.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, Harrison, what do you think?
Hot Chimachi, who's taking on Grand?